If you'll open up to 1 Samuel 18, we're going to, Lord willing, try and finish up 1 Samuel 18 today. We read starting verse 6, and then we'll pray. 1 Samuel 18, verse 6. They were coming home when David returned from striking down the Philistine. The women came out of the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet Saul, with tambourines, with songs of joy, with musical instruments, and the women sang to one another as they celebrated. Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom?" And Saul eyed David from that day on. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had a spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, "I will pin David to the wall." But David evaded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000, and he went out and came in before the people. And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. Then Saul said to David, "Here is my elder daughter Merab. I will give her to you for a wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles." For Saul thought, "Let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him." And David said to Saul, "Who am I, and who are my relatives, my father's clan in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king?" But at that time, when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel the Maholathite for a wife. Verse 20. Now Saul's daughter Michal loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Saul thought, "Let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." Therefore Saul said to David a second time, "You shall now be my son-in-law." And Saul commanded his servants, "Speak to David in private and say, 'Behold, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now then, become the king's son-in-law.'" And Saul's servants spoke these words in David's ears, and David said, "Does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law, since I am a poor man and have no reputation?" And the servants of Saul told him, "Thus and so did David speak." Then Saul said, "Thus shall you say to David, 'The king desires no bride price except for 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged of the king's enemies.'" Now Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. And when the servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law. Before the time had expired, David arose and went with his men and killed 200 Philistines. And David brought their foreskins, which were given in full number to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him his daughter Michal for a wife. But when Saul saw, it's a tongue twister, when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. Then the commanders of the Philistines came out to battle, and as often as they came out, David had more success than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was highly esteemed. Let's pray here before we start. Father, we're just looking to you for help. We need you every day. We need you today, and we're thankful that we have your word. We're thankful that we can read it. And we just lift up this time to you and pray it be pleasing to you. Amen. Okay, as I was studying this week, I was reading this chapter, I realized one thing I wanted to go back and correct from last week. I realized that I had assumed last week that Jonathan knew David was going to be the next king, and I kind of lumped all his actions, including giving his armor to David, as like a sign that he was saying, like, I'm okay with not being king, and you're the anointed king. Well, that does happen, and that is Jonathan's attitude throughout his life. But what I didn't think about was we don't actually know when they found out that David was anointed king. I'll give you a reason that we don't. It specifically says in 1 Samuel 16, Samuel said, when God told him to anoint David, "How can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me." And the Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord, and invite Jesse to sacrifice, and I shall show you what you shall do. And you shall anoint for me him whom I declare to you." So 1 Samuel 16 specifically says, Samuel's scared that Saul's going to kill him, and God tells him, well, you don't have to tell everyone, I'm going to anoint a king instead of Saul. You just say that you're going to make a sacrifice, which he was going to make a sacrifice to the Lord. So he wasn't lying. He didn't have to announce it to everyone. And so it was actually a secret there. And we don't know exactly when Jonathan and Saul found out. You might think maybe here, in this chapter, when Saul says, "What more can you give him than the kingdom?" That's kind of, you could think, well, does he know? My thought, we don't know for sure, but my thought is that that's an ironic statement, but he didn't actually know that he is just jealous of his fame. To me, the first hint of suspicion that Saul definitely knows that David was anointed is in 1 Samuel 20, when it says, "Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said to him, 'You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die.'" That to me seems very likely, in my view, that he knew then, that he's saying specifically to Jonathan, "Jonathan, if David keeps living, you will not be king. David is going to be king." And so he's really upset at him for siding with David there. So what I said last week about Jonathan, I think, was true. Jonathan is humble. Jonathan giving his armor to David is, a picture of Christ, taking off his, honor and glory and laying it aside to love us and die for us. And even though he is rightfully king. And so I think all that's true, but I don't know if Jonathan actually knew that David was going to be king right then. That same attitude he continues on throughout the rest of the book. So I think all those points are valid. But I didn't think, well, when does it exactly say that they found out? And I had forgotten that it was kind of this secret, not as public as it could have been in 1 Samuel 16. So I just wanted to go back and correct that and also kind of set the stage for this week. What's going on here? That actually helps us. I was thinking about this because that helps us set the stage for this chapter. What's going on here? Is Saul so upset at David because he knows he's going to be king? Well, I think I kind of already spoiled my conclusion. I don't think he actually knows that he's been anointed king yet. He does know he's been rejected by God, and it says that he was upset because God was with David and God wasn't with Saul. He says specifically in this chapter, God points that out to us through, the writer here of 1 Samuel, that Saul was jealous of David because of that. Well, let's look at those passages here and look at what it specifically says about Saul's envy and jealousy. Let's just highlight a few of those verses. 1 Samuel 18, 8 and 9. Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. And he said, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s, to me they have ascribed thousands, and what more can he have but the kingdom?" And Saul eyed David from that day on. Jumping down a little bit, 18:12. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. And then again, 18:15. When Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. Okay, so the topic I want to talk about today is two sides of one coin, the good side and the bad side, of contentment. We see David's contentment and we see Saul's discontentment, or we could say envy and jealousy, which are all words we use to describe someone who's not content. And I thought I would just share kind of story that was interesting to me that just came up this week in the news. I'm not commenting on I don't deeply know this whole story. I just saw it on the news and it related to this. So the news story you may or may not have seen it, is that to set the context, I was listening to this sports talk where they talk about basketball and football and stuff, and there's a big scandal that just came out where the government arrested and tried, said like, you're guilty. I don't know if they're out on bond or all the details, but basically the crime that's supposed to be committed is that there's an NBA coach who makes many millions of dollars and got involved in like gambling and like rigging games, and then there's also players involved who people bet on them and they're trying to make extra money for their family or whatever, and they're like, oh, I'll just say I don't feel good tonight and you guys all bet this and that, and trying to just get money. And the thing that was interesting to me is there's a guy on this sports talk show that is a professing Christian, and he's so much so that sometimes the other hosts who aren't professing Christians will bring out a Bible verse to try and convince him when they're really trying to convince him of something. So it's kind of actually refreshing to me that he's like an outspoken Christian, and so much so that they try and appeal to that, and that can be on TV. I think it's positive in a sense that he's, and they'll say that he doesn't curse, and he does a good job on TV or whatever, being kind to people and things like that. So anyways, he comes on there and they're asking, well, what's your take on this? And he said, I'll tell you what my take is. Here's one word: greed. Here's these people, they're making millions and millions of dollars, and it's not enough. Literally, top of the top of salaries, and they decide, I'm willing to ruin my life to get a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. It's discontentment. And he doesn't really, he kind of talks about it, but I thought it was a very astute comment, and it was very different than what everyone else was really talking about. He's talking about the root heart sin problem, right? It's kind of what this guy was bringing out. And I thought, well, that is actually a great intro into this sermon. That no matter how much someone has, discontentment can rob you of joy and of being where God wants you to be. Think about Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve lived literally in paradise, right? And what? Discontentment robbed them of paradise, right? They chose to sin because they felt like, we've got everything. Everything's perfect, but we can't eat from this one tree. Yeah, I'm discontent. I want that. Thomas Watson brings this out. He says this: our first parents, clothed with the white robe of innocency in paradise, had not learned to be content. They had aspiring hearts and would be crowned with the deity and be, quote, be as gods, which is what Satan said. Though they had the choice of all the trees in the garden, yet none would content them but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Well, this is not just true for, coaches in the NBA, and it's true for humanity. That one of the problems with our hearts as the result of the fall is discontentment. I'll quote Thomas Watson again: if men are poor, they learn to be envious. They malign those who are above them. Another's prosperity is an eyesore. When God's candle shines upon their neighbor's tabernacle, this light offends them. In the midst of poverty, men can, in this sense, abound, namely in envy and malice, an envious heart, an evil eye, and they learn to be querulous and complaining, as if God had dealt harshly with them. They are never telling their needs. They lack this and that comfort, whereas their greatest need is a contented spirit. Well, that really describes Saul pretty well, doesn't it? Saul here is literally king of Israel. And he has this evil eye, towards David. You've heard the term evil eye probably before. Give somebody the evil eye. I didn't realize that comes from Hebrew. That probably came into our culture from the Bible. That's a phrase that comes up in Hebrew, giving somebody the evil eye, the bad eye. And that's what's implied here when it said, Saul, I, David. Saul, I, David. Saul was jealous of David. Now remember what we learned about David from David and Goliath. He was small. He was like a child, a youth. They kept calling him, you're a youth, you're too young. Here's this little guy. So remember, Saul is the tallest of the Israelites. He stood head and shoulders above them all. David couldn't even put on his armor. And when he hears the ladies singing this song about Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s, he cannot handle it. He is so upset that he says crazy things like, well, what more can they do than give him the kingdom? It's an exaggeration. They just praised David. They praised David and he could not handle it. To the point where he raved, it says, and he tried to even kill David. Discontentment is a horrible thing. It's something that we should fight. It's something that we want to think about. We want to consider our hearts. Remember, in Hebrew, the word heart isn't emotions. It's more than that. We think of heart, we think your emotions in English, but it's really more your mind, your will, your knowledge. All that is, your whole inner life is your heart. And as the proverb said, we should guard our heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Well, one of the ways we can guard our heart is thinking about discontentment and contentment. Well, we're focusing on the negative to start. We're focusing on Saul, his envy and jealousy of David, and how he was so upset. What does Proverbs say about this? It says, a tranquil heart gives life to the flesh, but envy makes the bones rot. We see that here with Saul. Saul's bones were rotting. He was rotting from the inside out. He was emotionally just devastated. Why? Because there was a song praising somebody else. He raved within his house while David was playing the lyre day by day. Well, what else can we say about discontentment and jealousy? Let's think about it this way. I'm going to ask a few questions to set up how we understand this. Where does all we have come from? Where does all we have come from? Well, John the Baptist gives us an answer in John chapter 3. A person cannot receive even one thing unless it is given him from God, from heaven. Everything we have comes from God. Everything. So where does all we have come from? It comes from God. God is the one that made Saul king. God's the one that can take the kingdom out of Saul's hand. God is the one that gave David the victory over Goliath. Think about the Israelites in the wilderness. You remember what happens? They are delivered from Egypt, and they're on their way to Israel, which isn't yet Israel. It's not called Israel yet, but they're on their way through the wilderness, and they're discontent. Remember what Moses says to them, therefore it is against the Lord that you and your company have gathered together. What is Aaron that you grumble against him? Again, in Numbers 11, a similar thought. The people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outlying parts of the camp. Remember, they complained. They complained about a lot of different things in the wilderness. They weren't content just to be delivered from slavery and be on their way to a land of milk and honey. They wanted not only God to give them the promised land, they wanted it to be easy, right, on the way there. And they wanted to tell God exactly how you should get us there. You should get us there with meat, not manna. And they miss their garlic and their onions. It's not just the Israelites. It's not just Adam and Eve. It's us too. It's not just NBA coaches. It's teachers and gardeners and all kinds, every person from the highest to the lowest. Discontentment can get into our hearts. Well, let's talk about the opposite. Let's talk about contentment. Contentment. That's the negative. We want to guard against discontentment because we're complaining against God. God is the one who gives us all things. Well, moving from Saul to David. Look at David's attitude here. When they talk to David about being the son-in-law of the king, he says, "Is that such a small thing? I'm just a poor servant." He has the opposite attitude. He's not aching for more. He's saying the opposite. They're offering him more, and he's saying, I'm not sure that's good. I'm not sure that's for me. That's an honor. I'm not sure it's mine to take. Over and over, David is showing contentment here. There's some ways even that are maybe a little bit hidden of David's contentment with his place. It would be hard to be a servant of a king who's raving, who's a mad king, right? And yet he faithfully continued to serve him. We see that here in 1 Samuel 18. Even after Saul tried to pin David to the wall, David continued to faithfully serve. They offer him to be son-in-law to the king, and he's humble. Let's look here at a couple of verses. This one I've already quoted, Proverbs 14:30. Let's look at the opposite side. A tranquil heart gives life to the flesh, but envy makes the bones rot. Well, we already talked about the second half of that envy makes the bones rot, that discontentment can bring misery into any situation. Discontentment brings misery even into paradise, literally. What's the opposite? A tranquil heart gives life to the flesh. I'm going to quote again here Thomas Watson. He has a lot to say about contentment. It is a glorious thing indeed for one to be content when he is in heaven. It is no wonder, but to be content under the cross is like a Christian. This man must needs bring glory to God, for he shows to all the world that though he hath a little meal in his barrel, yet he hath enough in God to make him content. Like David said in the Psalms, the Lord is the portion of mine inheritance, and the lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. Contentment glorifies God. Think about the reverse. We already said that discontentment is complaining against what God has given us. Contentment is a tranquil heart, is a humble spirit towards God. God, you're the one that allot my times and boundaries in my dwelling place. He knows. Contentment can bring peace even under the cross. He contrasts discontentment robbing paradise of its joy, and he says the opposite is that contentment brings joy and peace even under the worst circumstances, even under when you're carrying your cross. Well, I'm going to quote one more here. Quote, I guess you can probably guess who this quote's from. Outward troubles cannot hinder this blessed contentment. It's a spiritual thing and arises from spiritual grounds, the apprehension of God's love. When there is a tempest without, there may be music within. A bee may sting through the skin, but it cannot sting to the heart. Outward afflictions cannot sting to a Christian's heart, where contentment lies. Thieves may plunder us of money and goods, but not this pearl of contentment, unless we're willing to part with it, for it is locked up in the cabinet of the heart. The soul which is possessed of this rich treasure of contentment is like Noah in the ark. It can sing in the midst of a deluge. Who had the more difficult circumstances here in this chapter? Saul or David? Think about Saul. Saul's king of Israel, and Saul just has to sit there and listen to them sing praises to him. And they added a second person in that song. And they added David right in there next to his name. And boy, that really bothered him. And what about David? David served a king who was crazy and tried to kill him and sent him out all these battles. Promised him to marry his daughter and then didn't. And then tries to literally trap him. You know, his goal even of giving his second daughter to David as a wife was hoping that he would die fighting the Philistines. David is the one with the tranquil heart, and Saul is the one who envy makes his bones rot. He had the much more difficult situation, but he had peace trusting God. David did. Whereas Saul really isn't a difficult situation hardly at all, but he's so envious that it eats him from the inside out. Well, what can we say about contentment? How can we have this contentment? Where does it come from? Well, I'm going to turn to the New Testament for the answer to that. Paul tells us in Philippians 4, "Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound in any and every circumstance. I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me." I can do all things through him who strengthens me. If we are going to be content, we need God. Discontentment is something that every person who's affected by the fall is going to have to deal with. There's going to be situations in our life where we're going to feel discontent, where we're going to feel envious or jealous. And what do we need? We need God. We need Christ. We need help. We've already talked about how this is a heart problem. Contentment is not a situation problem. Contentment and discontentment is a heart problem. You could be in the perfect situation, and if there is discontentment growing in your heart, you will find something to be discontent about, just like Adam and Eve did in the garden, even if you're in the perfect situation. On the opposite hand, if God can die on the cross, wash away our sin, and promise us a new heart, he can help us wherever we are to be content, even in difficult things. And that's what Paul says here, that he learned to be content, whether he's being brought low or whether he's abounding. Contentment can be with you wherever you are. And it can bring peace and joy into your life, even in the midst of difficulties, facing, as Paul said, plenty and hunger, abundance and need. But we need God. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. God is the one who helps us in the difficulty. God is the one that helps us through his death on the cross to give us this new heart, a new heart that is not so focused on outward things or other people's praise, but on him, on pleasing him. And we need help. But the good news is there's an opportunity. We can ask him for help. We can confess when we fall short, and he wants to help us. It's something Paul said he learned. He learned it. Well, he learned it from God. God's the one who's helping him. I want to bring out a few more points here, and then I'm going to circle back around and basically say the same thing again with a couple stories from history. A couple things we want to see. Life is not a competition. Life is not a competition. Saul is viewing life as a competition. Who's going to be highest? Are they going to put David higher, or are they going to put me higher? That's not the way life works. Life is not a competition. God has a different purpose for you and me and every other person. We're not competing with one another. We're working together. What's our goal? Well, it makes me think of the importance of knowing your purpose. And for the kids, we have this catechism. Why did God make me? To serve him, to be like him, and to be with him all my days. That's our purpose. To serve God, to be like God, and to be with God all our days. It's not to serve him more than the person next to me. It's just to serve him. You, where you are. The Christian life is more like rowing than boxing, right? Rowing is you're all in the boat together, and you're all trying to pull the same direction. And if you compete, it's actually going to go worse, right? They have I think they call it the Wainwright, the guy standing in the front saying, pull, pull, pull. And they all try and row together. They're all trying to go the same direction. Saul is viewing the Christian life like a boxing match. Who's going to be left standing? Who's going to be on top? Well, that's a good way to get a black eye, right? You and me and Saul and David and every other person that God made in the world all have a purpose, and we're all pointing in the same direction. And we don't have to elbow one another, and we don't have to knock one another out of the way. We can actually help one another along. And that your light shining brighter doesn't put out my light, etc. Because life's not a competition. We're all just trying to serve God. There's a few other things that I want to bring out here. We don't deserve more. We don't deserve more. I'm reading a little between the lines here, but the contrast between David and Saul in this chapter seems to be that Saul feels like he deserves more, and David feels the opposite. He's saying, I don't really deserve to be the son-in-law of the king. Whereas Saul is saying, I deserve more honor. We don't deserve more. We want to be like David, who says, who am I? And who are my relatives that I should be son-in-law to the king? Well, the interesting thing is, not only is this an example for us from Saul and David, but we could say this literally, right? In the sense, if we're Christians, we are being brought into the king's family, right? We are going to be co-heirs with Christ because of what he did for us on the cross. Isn't that enough honor? Isn't it more than we deserve? Absolutely. Thomas Watson has another quote here. Thomas Watson, my favorite Puritan. I said this before, that of all the Puritans, Thomas Watson is definitely approachable in modern day. Most of the Puritans' titles you couldn't even fit in a tweet, of their books, let alone their sentences, Whereas Thomas Watson's got so many good little quotes. It says, sea of suffering is better than a drop of sin, Little things like that are just, they're memorable and they're readable. So if you've tried the Puritans and you haven't really kind of bounced off them, maybe try Thomas Watson. And his books are short, very short. So he's just, anyways, that's my Thomas Watson plug here. Thomas Watson, what is this discontent but arising from pride? These secretly tax the wisdom of God, that he has not made their condition a peg higher. Every man is complaining that his estate is no better, though he seldom complains that his heart is no better. One man commends this kind of life, another commends that. One man thinks a country life best, another a city life. The soldier thinks it best to be a merchant, and the merchant to be a soldier. Men desire to be anything but what God would have them. How is it that no man is contented? Very few Christians have learned Paul's secret, Paul's lesson. Neither poor nor rich know how to be content. Well, he's saying this, wherever you are, we don't want to let discontent arise from pride, right? Isn't that seems like, again, we're reading a little bit between the lines, but it seems like Saul's discontentment arises from pride. We don't actually deserve more. We actually deserve worse, right? Wherever we are, we could say this: I deserve worse than where I am, not more. God's been gracious to me. I could be in a much worse place. The reason I am where I am is because God's been gracious and kind and patient with me. I don't deserve more. That thought can give contentment. We literally are in the kingdom of God. We've become co-heirs with Christ. We're going through difficulty. But we have God with us. We have forgiveness. We aren't where we deserve to be. We're in a much better place than we deserve to be. Okay, I'm going to conclude here with basically saying the same thing again. We have so many examples from history of this kind of a thing. A negative example, World War II. In World War II, Hitler could have won the war. Absolutely. It seems completely clear to me, personally. My opinion is that he could have won the war. But what happened? He decided it wasn't enough to take over Europe. He turned on Russia, which was his ally, and attacked them. I want Russia too. Split his forces into two fronts. Totally irrational. That's what sin does. It leads down this greedy path, right? It's so foolish to throw away your life for a couple more $1,000s to rig a poker game if you're making $1 million a week, playing basketball. That's foolish. But sin twists your heart. Sin is a downward spiral. We talked about it with the kids. What is sin? It's loving the darkness more than the light. It's saying to God, don't reign over me. And it's an animal crouching to devour you. Sin doesn't stop. It devours us. The person that sins continues on this downward spiral, or it's like an animal devouring them. It's never enough. We don't want to be like that. We don't want to be a person that throws away what God has given us because it's not enough. It's foolish. When you look at it from the outside, it looks foolish. We don't want to be like that. We want to be content. I'll give you an illustration here. Here's an illustration that is fictional, but I want you to imagine it. I've got a bag. I've used this before, but I really like this illustration. I have a bag here. Imagine in my hand. And you and I pick up, after the meal, we're going into the jail. Would everybody help pick up, because we gotta go into the jail. We need help. And then we're walking out the door, and I say, oh, I forgot. I got one thing for you. And I throw you the bag, and you grab it, and it's way heavier than you thought. Like, oh! And you pull your back out. Imagine that situation. And then you say, why would you do that to me? I'm, now insert your age here. Okay? And then you open the bag, and when you get in the car, you're upset. I just can't believe he was so inconsiderate and blah, blah. Whatever your complaint of choice is. And then when you get in the car and you open up the bag, it's bars of gold. then how would you feel? Well, it takes a little bit of the pain away, right? Well, that's an imperfect illustration. But that's what God is doing to us, okay? We are going, all of us, through difficulty. You cannot escape suffering in the sinful world. It's not possible, right? That's part of the difficulty of the sinful world. And yes, God's going to allow difficulties to happen to us. And we can complain along the way. He's given us that freedom. But we also have an opportunity to trust him, to trust that he knows what's for our good. And to know that this present suffering doesn't compare to the weight of glory that's to be revealed. We're going to be forgiven. We're going to be right with God. The whole world is going to be made new. There's not going to be any more pain or sickness or death. All things are going to be made right. The whole earth is going to be filled with the glory of God like the waters cover the sea. And that's going to last 100 million, billion, trillion times as long as we had to suffer. It's not even comparable. And yes, there is going to be a time of difficulty. That's part of our lives. But God is preparing for us this eternal weight of glory. And we can look forward to that. We can look towards that. We can look towards being with him, being like him, serving him, being like him, being with him all our days for eternity. And that's worth it. That's better. A sea of suffering is better than a drop of sin. We want this contentment. We can ask God, please help us. It doesn't mean that we don't have pain in our life, right? That's not what it means. Suffering hurts. We're not saying that we're never going to suffer, we're never going to be sad. What we're saying is even in the midst of that, we're content because what we have is still what's most important, God with us. That he's with us. Even in the midst of suffering. And that's what really matters. That's the treasure that is worth selling everything to buy the field. In his joy, he sold all he had to buy the field, right? Matthew 13. Remember last week, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, where Andy talked about in the epistles, I'm getting confused here. Bear with me. At prayer meeting, Andy shared a verse from the epistles about how we can be lights in the world, and it's talking about not complaining is one of the ways. And I got it confused with him sharing on Sunday. But he was just talking about how Paul points out that one of the ways we can be lights in the world is just not complaining. It seems like such a small thing, but it's not. It's a way to be a light in the world. I don't know if any of you have been a manager or worked at a place. Either one of us, either we've been a manager or have had a manager, I think most of us. And it seems like it really matters when you just are going to work and you're happy to do what they ask you to do, right? That's being a light in the world. Can you do this? Can you do that? Can you take on this? I'll do my best, That is actually a big thing. It's a huge thing. You can be a light in the world simply by being content where you are, by giving glory to God, by being thankful that you have hands to work and feet to walk and a mind to think. It's a wonderful thing. One final thought here as we close. There's a command in the New Testament, do all things without grumbling or complaining. We can cultivate this type of thinking.